Ever wondered just how far an overbearing HOA president would go to maintain absolute control? Buckle up, because you're about to witness a power trip so outrageous, it calls for a police intervention, literally. Keep reading to see how one homeowner's quiet act of defiance sparked a neighborhood showdown. And don't forget, once you've heard it all, share your own HOA tales and thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes unity is the strongest weapon against petty tyranny. When I retired last year, I moved to a cozy, sun-drenched community in Florida, believing I had finally discovered a slice of heaven, a modest single-story house with a small yard that rolled right up to a canal, complete with lazy palm trees. My street was serene, and my new neighbors seemed like decent folks, mostly retirees like me, enjoying the warm climate. But what I didn't fully understand was just how meddlesome and micromanaging a homeowners association could be. The president of our HOA, Marjorie, had an odd aura about her from the start. She was always meticulously dressed, from her pressed linen slacks to her precisely curled hair, like she'd stepped out of a catalog for neighborhood etiquette. At the new resident orientation, she approached me with a folder of guidelines that included rules for everything: mailbox design, fence height, even permissible garden colors. And while her high-pitched politeness might charm some folks, it gave me the feeling I was being sized up for future infractions. "It's a pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Peterson," she said, staring me dead in the eyes. "I do hope you'll keep our community shining bright and in order." I only half listened as she recited the rules. In reality, I just wanted to relax, enjoy my retirement, and indulge in quiet hobbies like fishing off my small dock or tinkering in my garage. I paid my HOA dues in advance so there'd be no confusion about my commitment, but deep down, I found myself bracing for trouble. My gut told me that Marjorie was trouble incarnate. The first friction came about 2 weeks after I'd settled in. A notice appeared on my front door with a bold red stamp reading, "Violation." Allegedly, the color of my front porch chairs, simple wooden chairs I'd painted teal, clashed with the community aesthetic, which favored more neutral or pastel tones. I reread the rulebook and found no direct mention banning teal. Confused, I tried calling Marjorie. When she didn't pick up, I decided to wait until the next HOA meeting to discuss the matter politely. That next meeting was like stepping into a kindergarten class led by a stern teacher. We sat in a circle in a communal clubhouse, listening to every petty complaint, from the volume of someone's wind chimes to the angle at which a neighbor's satellite dish was mounted. Eventually, I mustered the courage to speak up. "Marjorie," I said, raising my hand, "I'm not sure if there's a misunderstanding, but my porch chairs—" "You mean the teal ones?" She cut me off. "Yes, they're in violation. We prefer neutrals, but the handbook says pastel or subdued colors, and teal is fairly subdued," I countered. I wasn't trying to be smart. I just wanted clarity. Marjorie's thin lips pressed into a tight line. "We'll discuss it further in a private session." Next item on the agenda. That was my first taste of the subtle tyranny in this community. It was like everything had to pass under Marjorie's unwavering gaze. But I was already getting a sense that teal chairs were only the beginning of her meddling. And then, one morning, it got personal. I woke early to find her in my backyard. Actually, it wasn't just my backyard, but the side yard that led to the canal. She was fiddling with the gate latch, apparently wanting access to the narrow common pathway behind the houses, which I'd locked for my own privacy. I stepped out in my slippers, clearing my throat. "Marjorie, what exactly are you doing?" She jumped slightly, but then straightened up. "Mr. Peterson, we have a rule. This gate must remain unlocked. It's for community officials to conduct inspections and ensure our canal banks remain compliant." I blinked at her, caught off guard. No one told me that. And it seems, it's on my property, isn't it? Shouldn't I control the lock? "Absolutely not," she snapped. "This is standard. If you don't unlock it, we will. The bylaws are clear." My annoyance shot up, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had a right to my property. Yet something told me that confrontation with Marjorie would be like stepping into quicksand. I didn't want unnecessary trouble, but at the same time, I wouldn't let my retirement be ruled by her petty demands. What I didn't realize was how far this lady was willing to go to assert her power, and just how quickly things could escalate when you deny an HOA president her rightful access to your yard. I left that encounter with my pulse pounding, determined to find the exact wording in the bylaws. If there was a legitimate rule about leaving gates unlocked for canal inspection, I wanted to see it in black and white. That night, I sifted through the thick binder of HOA documents. There was no mention of mandatory gate accessibility. Sure, there was a paragraph about HOA officials having the right to enter common property for maintenance checks, but my side gate, in my eyes, wasn't truly part of common anything, especially if the canal walkway was public land accessible from the main road anyway. I was still skimming the pages when my doorbell rang, well past 8 in the evening. I opened it to find my neighbor, Ed. He's a widower in his 70s, with a face weathered from years of Navy service. He looked uncomfortable. "Hey, neighbor," he said quietly. "I heard Marjorie's fussing over your gate. Came to let you know, she did the same thing when I moved in. She tried to claim I had to remove my porch screen door. Threatened me with fines. So, what did you do?" I asked, gesturing for him to come inside. He shrugged. I caved. Paid for a different screen door, more community compliant. But in truth, none of it was in the bylaws. It's just she'll keep at you, wearing you down. Hearing this only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to be her next doormat. "Thanks for letting me know, Ed. I think I'm going to push back." He nodded, giving me a tired grin. "Well, good luck. If you need a witness, I've got an earful of stories." Ed left, and I felt a strange mix of camaraderie and dread. I pictured Marjorie creeping into everyone's yards, dictating chair colors, gate access, or who knew what else. Was I the only one who refused to roll over? The next day, I made sure the gates stayed locked. Over breakfast, I caught sight of Marjorie from my window. She was strutting down the sidewalk in a lilac pantsuit, scanning the neighborhood as if she were a security camera. She paused by my driveway, narrowed her eyes at my gate, then marched off. I could almost hear the steam whistle going off in her head. I had to head out for a dentist appointment that morning, so I hopped in my car. As I backed out, I nearly collided with Marjorie's sedan. She screeched to a halt behind me, threw open her car door, and stomped toward me. "Mr. Peterson," she shrilled, "you will unlock that gate, or I'll issue a formal complaint and a fine. This is your last warning." A tiny part of me wanted to laugh at her theatrics, but I maintained composure. "Marjorie, there's no bylaw that says my private gate must stay unlocked." I checked. Her face darkened. "You can't possibly know all the sub-rules. They're in an addendum. Kindly show me, then," I said. "Until then, it stays locked." She stood there, sputtering, and I drove off, half expecting her to follow me to the dentist. On the way, I rehearsed various scenarios in my mind. Maybe I was being stubborn, but I had no desire to bend over backward for nonsense. If I let her push me around now, she'd escalate later. When I returned home, I found a bright orange notice taped to my door. Mandatory compliance. Notice of fine. It cited obstruction of common property. The fine was set at some outrageous amount, $250, with a threat it would double in 7 days. That was it. I marched over to the HO office, a small trailer near the clubhouse, planning to contest the fine. But it was locked. A hand-scrawled note on the door said, "President in meeting. Return 3 p.m. I glanced at my watch. 2:57 p.m. Maybe I could catch Marjorie in the act of issuing more bogus tickets to unsuspecting neighbors. Sure enough, 3 minutes later, our lavender sedan squealed into the lot. She stepped out, pivoted toward me, and froze like she'd seen a ghost. I held up the orange notice. "Mind explaining this?" She gave me a frosty grin. "This is just the beginning if you continue to defy the regulations." I exhaled, trying to keep calm. "I want to appeal this fine." Immediately. "Good luck," she retorted. "The appeals board is me, the treasurer, who I've known for 20 years, and our community secretary, who's my sister-in-law. So unless you decide to comply, you'll be seeing an increased fine soon." A surge of anger welled in my chest. I was no stranger to bureaucracy, but this felt like a racket. Still, I kept my voice steady. "I'll handle this the proper way, Marjorie. If necessary, I'll consult my lawyer." She bristled. "I assure you, any lawyer will tell you the same thing. follow the rules, or face the consequences. I walked away, each step pounding with irritation. It occurred to me that if she had the power to levy fines at whim, she might escalate the situation in other creative ways. But no matter how creative she got, she wasn't prepared for what was about to happen when she decided to bring in the local authorities on false pretenses. Because I wasn't the only one fed up with Marjorie's dictatorial style. And when you cry wolf to the police, you better have a solid case. Otherwise, you end up looking pretty foolish in front of the entire neighborhood. A week later, the threatened second fine notice arrived, this time an eye-watering $500 tucked under my windshield wiper like a parking ticket. It was bizarre seeing my car singled out in the driveway, but I had half expected it. Determined to squash this nonsense, I drove to the city clerk's office to request the official property and easement records. I wanted to see in writing exactly who had rights to my backyard gate. Turns out the canal path behind our homes was indeed public land. That meant HOA bylaws could dictate only so much. The rest fell under county ordinances. And those ordinances said nothing about private gates to private yards needing to be unlocked. Armed with that knowledge, I felt more confident than ever. The next showdown came that evening when Marjorie slipped an envelope under my door. Inside was a formal letter with the HOA letterhead, demanding immediate payment of the $500 fine, or as the letter stated in ominous bold letters, further action will be taken. I typed out a polite but firm email refusing to pay, attaching the relevant county documents, and CC'd her entire board. In the morning, I woke up early for my usual routine, coffee on a porch, reading the news on my tablet. That's when I noticed the commotion out front. An unfamiliar SUV was parked at the curb, and Marjorie stood talking to two uniformed police officers, gesturing wildly toward my house. My heart leapt into my throat. I set down my mug and stepped outside. One of the officers waved, friendly enough, while Marjorie pointed in my direction. "There he is," she said, her voice high and strained. "He's blocking the community's required access to the canal, and that is a violation of the law." I approached, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Good morning, officers. I'm Mr. Peterson. Can I help you with something?" "We got a complaint," said Officer Reyes, glancing at Marjorie, "that you're preventing authorized HOA personnel from conducting inspections behind your property. She claims it's a safety hazard." I suppressed a laugh but kept my tone measured. "Officers, my gate is on my private property. It leads to a publicly accessible walkway by the canal. There's no law or ordinance, nor any official HOA bylaw that mandates I keep it unlocked." Marjorie's face twisted. "He's lying. There's an addendum somewhere." "I'm sure of it." Officer Reyes consulted a small notepad. "Ma'am, did you bring a copy of these regulations? A written policy stating this gate must be unlocked." Her eyes darted left and right. "Ah, it's in the community binder. I can bring it." "What section?" I interjected, pulling out my phone. "I have a PDF copy of the HOA rules right here." Her face paled. She took a step backward, unable to cite a single reference. The other officer, a quiet but observant woman, folded her arms. "Unless you can show a specific law or bylaw, there's not much we can do, Ms. Marjorie. This is looking more like a civil matter than a criminal one." Marjorie's voice rose another octave. "He's interfering with official HOA business. I want him cited or removed from the property if necessary." Officer Reyes shot her a sympathetic but firm look. "Ma'am, that's not how this works. He owns the property. You can't claim trespassing on his own land, nor can you force him to remove a lawful lock." I almost felt sorry for her, almost. The entire neighborhood had begun to notice the spectacle. People were peeking from windows, and a few had even stepped onto their porches to watch. Ed stood in his driveway, arms folded, a small grin playing on his lips. Marjorie, perhaps sensing the crowd's eyes on her, tried another tactic. "Officers, I must insist. He's endangering lives by refusing us access. If there were an emergency..." The female officer cut her off. "Then emergency responders can and will enter through any means necessary. They don't need an unlocked gate. That's not how emergency protocols work, Ms. Marjorie." And just like that, the tension in the air deflated, replaced by an almost comical silence. The police were clearly on my side. Marjorie's face was bright red, and she looked near tears. Without a leg to stand on, she sputtered, "This isn't over," then stopped back to her car and sped off, leaving the officers shaking their heads. "You have a good day, Mr. Peterson," Officer Reyes said. "And sorry for the disturbance." As they drove away, I exhaled a sigh of relief. But I also couldn't help wondering, was this truly the end or merely the eye of the storm? Marjorie's parting words, "This isn't over," lingered in my mind. A woman that rigid didn't usually back down after a single public humiliation. She'd do everything in her power to keep her iron grip over the neighborhood. And if pushing the police to side with her had failed, I suspected her next move might be even more drastic. In the days following the police visit, Marjorie kept an uncharacteristically low profile. No new fines appeared on my door, and no more orange notices fluttered against my windshield. For a moment, I allowed myself a sliver of hope that her public embarrassment had reigned in her behavior. It even joked, maybe she's taking up knitting or therapy, but I wasn't convinced. I knew better than to trust a sudden lull. Sure enough, at the next monthly HOA meeting, she reemerged with a brand new proposal, a revised set of bylaws. I caught wind of it through Ed, who heard the whispers. Marjorie was pushing for a rule that gave the HOA emergency access rights to any gates adjacent to common areas. She intended to codify her vendetta into official policy. The meeting took place in the clubhouse, a modest, glass-walled room overlooking a community pool. Usually, only a handful of seniors attended, content to let Marjorie do her thing. This time, the room was packed. Word had spread about the police showdown, and curiosity was high. Folks wanted to see the fireworks firsthand. Marjorie stood at the front, tapping a pen on a stack of papers. She opened with a honeyed smile, acknowledging new attendees. Then she got down to business. "Residents, our community's safety has been jeopardized. We must revise our guidelines to ensure immediate access for board members to conduct vital inspections behind every property. These new rules will keep our canal system pristine and everyone safe." I raised my hand. "How do you define immediate access? Are you suggesting the HOA can enter any yard without the owner's permission?" Her smile tightened. "Only in official capacities such as water management checks, code compliance, or emergencies." She tried to move on, but I persisted. "Is there actual evidence that any property owner's locked gate prevented a legitimate inspection? Perhaps you'd like to share that data." A few neighbors snickered. Marjorie's gaze flicked to me, that old spark of annoyance flaring in her eyes. "Mr. Peterson, I'll remind you that we're discussing a community-wide policy, not personal disputes." "It seems personal," I shot back. "You called the police to my house last week over this exact issue." An audible gasp fluttered through the audience. It appeared not everyone knew the details. A low murmur spread among the crowd as some turned to whisper or nod sympathetically in my direction. Marjorie's face stiffened, but she forced a regal posture. "The police were called due to potential safety violations. That's all." Curiously, another voice spoke up, Carla, one of the board members. She cleared her throat. "Marjorie, the officers declared there was no violation, right?" I read the incident report. They found no reason to mandate access. That single question from her own colleague caused Marjorie to falter. A flicker of doubt passed over her features. "That's because the current bylaws are out of date," she snapped. "Hence this revision." Carla simply nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to argue further. Next, Marjorie opened the floor for a vote on her revised rules. Normally, these votes were rubber-stamped. But as hands rose, I noticed something remarkable. At least half the people seemed to vote against her. "We need a roll call," Marjorie declared, voice tight. The secretary, who, in typical fashion, was related to her by marriage, started reading off names. Person after person indicated their stance. Some clearly favored Marjorie, but many abstained or outright opposed the measure, citing concerns about privacy and overreach. When the final tally was read, the revision failed by a slender margin. A hush fell over the room. Everyone looked at Marjorie, waiting for her reaction. She seemed stunned, as if she'd never imagined losing. Her face flushed, lips pursed so tightly they vanished into a scowl. "Well," she said, nearly choking on the word, "this matter is closed." The meeting ended, and folks milled around, buzzing with excitement over the unexpected turn. I spotted Ed grinning ear to ear. Several neighbors, people I hardly knew, approached to shake my hand or clap me on the shoulder, muttering things like, "Good for you," or finally someone standing up to her. It was a humbling moment. Sometimes the older we get, the more we want to avoid drama. But that day, I realized that complacency had allowed Marjorie's power to grow unchecked. All it took was a little pushback and the unveiling of her pettiness for everyone else to find their courage. A few days later, I received an email from the HOA treasurer, not Marjorie, mind you, stating all pending fines against me had been voided, effective immediately. The email was short and to the point, no apology attached. But I'd take a victory in any shape or form. Still, I wondered if Marjorie would continue her crusade. Surely she'd been humiliated, and public embarrassment isn't something people like her brush off easily. But for now, the neighborhood was waking up from its slumber, seeing a path to resist tyranny, one teal chair or locked gate at a time. The next time I ran into her was about a week later. I was out front, trimming my hedges, when her sedan rolled by. She slowed down, shot me a venomous glance, and then sped away. I smirked at the thought that she'd have to get used to the fact that some battles, especially ones fought on shaky legal ground, are destined to be lost. Was she plotting some new angle? Possibly. But at least for the moment, she had run out of steam, and the neighborhood had seized an opportunity to stand against arbitrary rules. The police had taken my side, the board had voted against her latest stunt, and that suffocating aura of fear was dissipating. I went back to my hedges, letting out a satisfied breath. This was the retirement I'd dreamed of, after all, living life on my own terms, refusing to cower before a petty dictator. And if she tried anything else, well, I'd be ready. We all would. What about you? How would you handle a power-hungry HOA president determined to trample on your rights? Share your stories, advice, or opinions below. Because while retirement is meant to be peaceful, standing up for yourself and your neighbors can sometimes be the only way to keep that peace alive and remind any self-proclaimed tyrant that their reign has limits.